9 months. That's how long Sergeant Daniel Brooks had been gone. 9 months of deserts, silence, and distance. When he finally stepped off the bus that autumn evening, the weight of his duffel bag was nothing compared to the weight of one question. Would his dog remember him? Through the window of the little blue house on Maple Street, the same blue house Daniel had painted with his father 15 years ago, a shadow stirred. Cooper had been waiting there almost every night, perched by the worn spot on the hardwood floor. Tonight, his posture was different, rigid, ears straining, body trembling with something more than just hope. Daniel paused at the bottom step. His boots, dusty from travel, stilled against the gravel. He could face battlefields, but this moment left him frozen. He had pictured the reunion 1,000 times, Cooper bounding toward him, tail thrashing. But deep inside, a darker thought gnawed. What if distance had erased him from Cooper's memory? The silence was a vacuum. Cooper's head tilted, his nose tasting the air, then stopped. Stillness. No bark. No movement. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this silence wasn't fear, it was protection. Cooper was hiding something. The moment felt like a betrayal. His mind raced. Did I come home too late? Daniel had faced explosions that left him less shaken than this silence. Inside, only the shadow of the dog he left behind. He reached for the door. The doorknob was cold, the brass biting his palm. Daniel didn't turn it. He pushed. The door cracked open only an inch, just enough for him to see Cooper's profile, and the sight of a second, unfamiliar dog bowl placed next to the worn rug. Cooper wasn't alone. The tension sharpened, replaced by a sudden, metallic taste of confusion. Cooper inched forward, one hesitant step at a time. The sound was wrong. Daniel didn't see the ecstatic tail wags he'd practiced in his head for 9 months. He saw a scar. A fresh, angry mark running down Cooper's flank, a detail Daniel had never been told. The reunion he'd dreamed of was a lie. Daniel dropped his duffel bag. "It's me," his voice cracked, a confession. Cooper finally moved, but his gaze wasn't on Daniel's face. It was locked on the duffel bag, then flicked toward the stairs. Cooper wasn't waiting for Daniel. He was waiting for the scent of the person who had been living here with him. Cooper finally pressed his head against Daniel's chest, but it was with the dead weight of exhaustion, not the force of joy. Cooper collapsed into the arms he thought he had lost. Daniel felt the rapid, shallow asterisk thump 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 asterisk of Cooper's heart against his own, a broken metronome suddenly beating again. But as Daniel held his dog, feeling a profound, quiet relief, he pulled back. He looked closely at Cooper's collar. It was new, and engraved on the metal was a second name. Who was Charlie, and why was he wearing Daniel's dog? Every night on Maple Street, the same vigil repeated itself, but it wasn't lonely. As the sun fell and the air cooled, Cooper would climb the front porch and settle by the gate. He wasn't looking for Daniel anymore. He was listening. A few houses down, the light in the kitchen of the Miller house would flicker on. They were the first to notice the severe change in Cooper. The neighbors saw devotion. What Daniel wouldn't see, when he finally returned, was that Cooper's waiting was now a duty. His body moved with a tense, practiced slowness. Cooper would shift his weight, circle once, and finally lower himself to the ground with a heavy sigh, but not of sadness. It was the sigh of a dog that had spent its day working. Inside the house, the silence pressed in. The boots remained by the door, untouched. But next to them now was a bright red nylon leash, coiled neatly. It wasn't Daniel's. It was the leash of the person who took Cooper out every day, the person who had slowly begun to replace Daniel in the dog's routine. Far away, in the desert, Daniel clutched the memory of Cooper like a lifeline. When exhaustion set in, he'd try to summon the sound of Cooper's bark. But time played cruel tricks. The bark was an unreliable echo, and the only reliable sound was the name Charlie showing up unexpectedly on his weekly email update from the neighborhood watch list, reporting a strange man seen walking his dog. Daniel carried the fear that the bond was gone. But the true danger was that a new, stronger one had replaced it. Winter came early that year, settling over Maple Street. The dog who once leapt with reckless joy had grown thinner, his movements slower. Cooper was not just waiting. He was deteriorating from the weight of his new responsibility. Inside, Cooper's pacing was no longer grief. It was a routine patrol. He stopped at the bedroom door, pushing it open with his nose. The bedspread still carried Daniel's faint smell, but this time, Cooper didn't curl up. He nudged the mattress, hard. And beneath the loose sheet, he revealed a small, worn leather glove Daniel had never seen before. A human was sleeping here. Who could that be? Cooper didn't just miss Daniel's scent. He was agitated by a faint, unknown cologne now staining the pillow. The bed was not empty. It had been recently used by a stranger. Sometimes, when the wind was still, Cooper would stand by the window, peering out not at the street, but at the backyard. The neighbors, watching from across the fence, saw only a devoted sentinel. They didn't see Cooper carefully nudging a stack of prescription pill bottles hidden beneath the back porch railing, bottles that were definitely not Daniel's. Daniel marked the days, unaware he was racing against more than just his deployment clock. He was racing against a tragedy in motion. The truth was that Cooper had been fighting his own unseen battle, a silent custody battle. Because tonight, the light on Maple Street was about to reveal two men who both believed Cooper belonged to them. And when the real reunion came, only one man would walk away whole. The gate creaked, a sound so ordinary yet charged with meaning. Cooper froze where he stood, body rigid, every muscle coiled as though the air itself demanded stillness. His ears twitched once, then locked forward, straining for confirmation. The world seemed to pause, caught between recognition and a far more dangerous doubt. Daniel stepped into the yard, his movements deliberate. His boots pressed against the gravel, each crunch echoing louder than it should, carrying the weight of 9 long months. His breath caught, his chest tight, not from exhaustion, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that the air smelled different. Not just the scent of time and distance, but a faint, unknown cologne lingering on the porch wood. Cooper's gaze burned into him. The dog's tail did not wag, his paws did not move. He simply stood, statue still, the faintest shiver running through his frame. Daniel had trusted those eyes for certainty, but now they offered something else. Hesitation, a flicker of doubt, as if the long separation had been used to carve an unbridgeable distance. Had memory triumphed? Or had a new life already taken root? Daniel lowered his duffel bag. It dropped with a muted thud that startled Cooper. His body flinched, head tilting ever so slightly, torn between fear and familiarity. For a heartbeat, it seemed the dog might bolt, retreat to the house. And then, he took a step forward. Just one. A sniff of the air, a cautious tilt of the nose, zeroing in on the new nylon leash coiled beside Daniel's dusty boots. Daniel didn't speak. He simply lowered his shoulders, allowing the silence to stretch thin. Cooper crept forward again, paw by paw, until the space between them was close enough to taste but not yet close enough to trust. He stopped suddenly, ears pinning back, his nose hovering in the air, trembling. It wasn't the scent of war that confused him. It was a faint, familiar smell lingering on the man's uniform, a smell that Cooper knew belonged to Charlie. This was the instant where love could falter. The soldier waited, the dog stuttered, and the question hung heavy. Was Cooper about to choose the man who left, or the man who stayed? The frigid pause stretched into eternity. Daniel's throat tightened as he fought the urge to call out, to beg for recognition. Instinct told him to wait, to let Cooper decide for himself. But the silence shattered when the house phone rang inside the little blue house, a shrill, jarring sound that cut through the reunion. Cooper's entire body surged, not with joy toward Daniel, but with immediate duty toward the sound. His attention snapped away from the man, locking onto the house window. Daniel saw the focus in Cooper's eyes shift completely. The soldier was suddenly irrelevant. Before Cooper could bolt, Daniel's hand shot out, not toward the dog, but toward the red nylon leash coiled near the porch step. He crushed the cheap material in his fist. "Who brought you home?" Daniel whispered, the words ragged, forcing Cooper's attention back onto him. Cooper froze again. His body quivered between retreat and obedience. He lowered his head, nostrils flaring, drawing in Daniel's scent. For a single heartbeat, the present collapsed. The memories of countless mornings and shared meals battled with the new, learned routine of the past 9 months. The confusion on the dog's face was devastating. Daniel didn't push. He simply held the leash, allowing Cooper the space to choose, grounding his presence in absolute patience. The soldier's uniform smelled of dust and distance, but Cooper was wrestling with the faint, unknown cologne lingering beneath it, a smell that had become his new anchor. The seconds dragged on. Cooper's chest rose in sharp bursts. His head darted forward, then back again. The internal pressure became visible. Then, a sound. Barely audible. A single, raw whimper escaped Cooper's throat, pulled from a place of buried memory and present-day conflict. The soldier whispered the word again, lower this time, a sound only Cooper could recognize from the long nights of his puppyhood, home. And that was it. Cooper's eyes widened. Something in him shifted, visible, undeniable. The uncertainty vanished. The long separation, the new routine, the scent of the other man, all of it broke. Cooper's tail gave one powerful, familiar thump against the gravel. Cooper did not leap or bark. Instead, he took one hesitant step toward the leash in Daniel's hand. He pressed his head, not against Daniel's chest, but against the soldier's dusty boot, the familiar scent of his master's footstep finally overpowering the new scent of his replacement. The tension broke. Cooper collapsed into Daniel's arms, not a joyous sprint, but a desperate, quiet surrender. Daniel felt the dead weight of exhaustion, the release of 9 months of waiting. But the relief was fleeting. As Daniel held his dog, feeling the strong, familiar thumping of Cooper's heart, he heard the back door of the house creak open. Someone was watching. It happened in an instant. 1 second, Cooper stood frozen, the house phone's echo still hanging in the air. The next, recognition lit his eyes, and he surged forward, not in a blur of joy, but with the instinct of a shield. His paws struck Daniel's chest with such force the soldier nearly toppled backward. But Daniel didn't brace himself for the hug. He registered Cooper's movement as a block, forcing the soldier away from the front door just as the back door slammed shut with a sharp, final sound. Charlie was inside. The sound of the slamming door was lost beneath the dog's frantic cries. Daniel sank to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog, laughter and tears colliding in a messy, unstoppable tide. But the reunion was corrupt. Daniel felt it instantly, a rigid, protective tension in Cooper's side, a tension Cooper had never known before. Daniel's hand, still sticky from the grip on the red nylon leash he had grabbed, moved to stroke his dog. His fingers immediately snagged on rough, surgical thread. The reunion was over. The truth had begun. Cooper refused to let go, his head burrowed into Daniel's throat, not for comfort, but with the specific, desperate movement of a dog hiding the back of his neck from the window. When Cooper tried to steady himself, his rear right paw dragged an inch against the gravel. Daniel instantly felt the difference in weight distribution, the telltale sign of a severe injury hidden beneath the rush of joy. Daniel finally peeled Cooper back, fear overriding the relief. The injury was clear, a long, poorly stitched surgical wound running down Cooper's shoulder. Daniel's eyes narrowed, following a thin trail of dried, dark blood leading from the wound, across the porch, and ending right at the back door, the door that had just slammed. Cooper had been hurt defending someone, and that someone was inside. Daniel placed the dog gently down, forcing him to sit. The soldier's face, etched with the memory of desert combat, hardened into a different kind of resolve. He reached down, grasped the heavy duffel bag he dropped, and pulled out his carved wooden combat knife, not as a weapon, but as the only familiar weight in this compromised home. He was not home for a reunion. He was home for a fight. Daniel moved with a brutal efficiency that Cooper had not seen in 9 months. The carved wooden knife, familiar and cold in his hand, was instantly hidden beneath his arm. He strode toward the back door, the one that had just slammed, his dusty boots silent against the porch wood. Cooper, whimpering softly, tried to follow, but Daniel laid a firm hand on his collar. "Stay." It was a command, not a plea. Cooper instantly obeyed, recognizing the deadly seriousness in the soldier's voice. Daniel did not knock. He turned the knob with a swift, decisive twist and pushed the door open. The kitchen was small, familiar, and strangely immaculate. But the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee. Standing by the sink, frozen with a half-used coffee mug in his hand, was the man. He was tall, thin, with a faded blue jacket and a patch of white surgical tape visible just beneath his left collar. Charlie! The two men locked eyes across the 10 feet of linoleum. It wasn't the image of a sleek rival Daniel had conjured in the desert. This man looked utterly broken. Daniel spoke first, his voice low, measured, and lethal. "The dog is hurt. Why didn't anyone call me?" Charlie did not flinch. He slowly set the mug down, his hands trembling slightly. "You're Daniel." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of inevitability. He took a single step back, his foot snagging on something small and metallic hidden beneath the kitchen rug. "Here's my dog," Daniel stated, his eyes flicking to the antiseptic wipes neatly stacked on the counter next to a handwritten veterinary discharge form. The dates confirmed it. Cooper had been seriously injured 2 weeks ago. "You took him." "I saved him," Charlie countered, his voice cracking. He gestured vaguely toward the living room, which Daniel couldn't see from the angle. "He needed help. He needed someone here." "I was coming home," Daniel pushed, stepping further into the room, forcing the confrontation. "You had no right to replace me." The accusation hung heavy, but Charlie finally met Daniel's gaze, and the man's eyes were not defiant. They were dark with a trauma that Daniel immediately recognized, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much. "I didn't replace you," Charlie whispered, his voice catching. "I just needed him to replace her." Daniel froze. The carved knife felt heavy, useless. Charlie closed his eyes, his breathing growing shallow. He reached for his jacket collar, pulling the fabric away from his neck, revealing not a clean, healing wound, but a network of raised, purple scars, the chilling, unmistakable result of severe burns. "Cooper saved me from the fire," Charlie said, his voice now a hollow echo. "My wife, she didn't make it. The dog wouldn't leave her side until the whole wall came down on him. He's not your dog anymore. He's my last memory of a home that burned down." Daniel stood in the kitchen, the scent of antiseptic and tragedy heavy in the air. The carved wooden knife felt heavy, useless. He looked from Cooper's wound to the network of purple scars on Charlie's neck, and knew he couldn't simply take the dog. Taking Cooper would be like ending Charlie's life a second time. "He saved him, Cooper," Daniel whispered, the words ragged. "He saved the house from the fire, but he couldn't save his wife." He was talking to the dog, but his gaze was fixed on the man. Charlie flinched, the accusation in Daniel's eyes finally finding its mark. "You saw the scar," Charlie said, his voice raw. "You know he wouldn't leave. He was trying to protect her. He almost died trying to save a ghost." Daniel dropped his duffel bag, a final, muted thud of surrender. "The vet form," Daniel said, pointing toward the counter. "It says 2 weeks ago. Why didn't you call me? I left an emergency number." "I was planning to," Charlie admitted, stepping back against the sink. "But every time I reached for the phone, Cooper would put his head in my lap. He was the only thing I had left of the warmth." Charlie's eyes dropped, focusing on a burn mark on the linoleum floor. "He needs stitches removed next week. The place you left him in, they didn't know how to care for that kind of wound." Daniel felt the surge of protectiveness, but the soldier's training kicked in. He needed a solution, not a breakdown. "I can't leave him with a man who can barely stand," Daniel stated, the judgment clear. "But I won't take him from a man who needs him to live. What is the compromise?" Charlie looked up, the first flicker of hope mixing with his pain. I need a little more time. The final insurance forms clear next month. After that, I'm moving far away." Daniel looked from the grieving, scarred man, then down at his dog, who was now resting his head near Daniel's dusty boot. Daniel knew the truth. Cooper was the only thing keeping Charlie anchored to life. 2 weeks, Daniel said, the words shocking him as much as Charlie. I stay for 2 weeks. I care for him. I remove the stitches. Then we decide who Cooper belongs to. Charlie's breath hitched, his eyes wide. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the ash on his cheek. The temporary arrangement was set, a truce bound by blood and sorrow. Daniel stepped away from the back door and looked toward the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. Where do I sleep? Charlie gestured toward a dark doorway. The spare room. It's dusty. But Cooper usually sleeps on the rug by the foot of my bed. Tonight, he'll have to choose. The atmosphere in the house was thin, stretched taut between 2 men bound by a dog and a shared tragedy. Cooper, sensing the frigid truce, stayed close to Daniel, his head resting against the dusty duffel bag. But the soldier knew the real test was coming. Daniel walked toward the spare room. It was narrow, cold, and smelled faintly of paint and disuse. He tossed the duffel bag onto the old metal bed frame. When he turned around, Cooper was standing in the doorway, tail hesitant, looking back down the hallway toward Charlie's room. It's okay, boy, Daniel murmured. Come here. Cooper took a step into the room, then stopped. He whined once, a low, conflicted sound. He wasn't choosing Daniel's presence. He was choosing his own duty. He turned slowly, moving back toward the threshold of Charlie's room, his tail giving one uncertain flick before disappearing. Daniel felt the rejection like a physical blow. It was a cold, silent confirmation that he was, at best, a cherished memory, but no longer the routine. He sat on the spare bed, his hand resting on the smooth wood of the combat knife hidden beneath the mattress. The weight of his guilt pressed down. Cooper had chosen the man who stayed, the man who had suffered the ultimate loss, the man who needed him to live. A muffled sound drew Daniel's attention. He moved quietly to the hallway and peered down the darkened stretch of carpet. Charlie's bedroom door was slightly ajar. Cooper wasn't inside. The dog was lying squarely in the middle of the hallway rug, directly between the 2 doors. His body, still weak from the wound, was stretched out like a drawn line. He was choosing neither man's comfort, nor his own. He was choosing his post. Daniel watched the wounded dog stand his vigil in the dark, just as he had on the porch for 9 months. But this time, Cooper wasn't waiting for a homecoming. He was guarding the truce. Charlie's voice drifted out from his room, quiet and shattered. He wouldn't come in. He said he had to protect us both. Daniel froze. Charlie wasn't talking to Cooper. He was talking to the empty space where his wife should have been. The grief in his voice was vast and absolute. The soldier stepped back into his room, a single, devastating truth hitting him harder than any bullet. Cooper hadn't chosen Charlie over him. Cooper had taken on the wife's role, providing the fractured man with the duty of care he needed to survive. Daniel lay down in the cold, dusty bed. He didn't sleep. He listened to the soft, uneven breaths of his dog sleeping in the hallway, the dog who had become a medic, a bodyguard, and a lifeline. Cooper had healed the man who stayed, but in doing so, he had broken the heart of the man who returned. The 2-week truce ended not with a fight, but with a piece of paper. The air in the little house was heavy with finality. Daniel stood in the middle of the kitchen, his posture rigid. Charlie sat at the small table, his burn scars tight against his neck, his hands trembling near a worn, white adoption form. "Cooper won't come in here," Charlie whispered, his voice a raw echo. "Not while we are arguing. He's still sitting on that hallway rug." Daniel knew it was true. Cooper, the sentinel, was still guarding the fragile peace. The soldier's eyes flickered from Charlie's defeated face to the kitchen counter, where a clean pair of surgical scissors lay next to the now empty vet bottle. Daniel had removed the stitches himself 2 days earlier. He had done his duty. "You've barely eaten," Daniel stated, the judgment clear. "You can't even stand a full day. You need a medic, not a dog." Charlie finally looked up, his eyes meeting Daniel's with absolute despair. "I know. But I also know this. I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since the fire, unless Cooper is right there. I'm barely alive. He's the only life I have left. Daniel swallowed hard, the soldier's anger finally collapsing into agonizing empathy. Charlie hadn't been waiting for Cooper. He had been saved by him. Daniel stepped forward, pushing the adoption form back toward the scarred man. "You can't sign this," Daniel said. "He's my dog. I won't lose him on paper." He reached into his duffel and pulled out a clean, new silver dog tag. Engraved on the metal were 2 names, Cooper Brooks Davis. Daniel looked at the worn, scarred man. "He needs you to live. I don't. The greatest love is sometimes letting go." He placed the tag on the counter, next to the adoption form he refused to sign. The soldier didn't need possession. He needed peace. The truce was over. The sacrifice was all that was left. Daniel opened the front door. He didn't look back at the hallway rug. He didn't need to see Cooper's decision. He already knew the answer. "I'm not leaving, Cooper," Daniel whispered to the empty air. "I'm giving you away." He stepped onto the gravel, his dusty boots spitting tiny stones. He looked in his rear-view mirror. Cooper wasn't chasing the car. The dog was sitting on the porch, his back to the road, looking through the living room window at Charlie. Cooper had chosen his post. Daniel drove away from Maple Street. He hadn't lost his dog to a rival. He had gifted a soul to a dead man. The love was the same, but the duty was higher. The final image lingered in Daniel's mind. His dog, the sentinel, finally ending his long vigil by starting a new one, guarding the man who needed him more. The story doesn't end here. It begins again, somewhere else. Daniel returned to his unit not long after. But he was no longer the silent soldier consumed by regret. He carried a new resolve, a resolve born of sacrifice, not battle. And every week, a small, worn postcard arrived at Daniel's new base. It never had a message, just 2 things, a single paw print, and a faded drawing of a dog lying on a hallway rug. It was Charlie's promise, a weekly reminder that Cooper was safe, and that the sacrifice was worth the cost. The greatest act of love wasn't the homecoming, it was the letting go. If Cooper's loyalty touched you, if it reminded you that sometimes the hardest choice is the only choice, tell us your story of sacrifice below. Because love like this deserves to be remembered.